Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Linux and open source news show. I hope the visuals are a bit better than the past few videos. I've moved back to my camera, but it's a weird setup. Anyway, who cares? This week, we've got Valve talking about the Steam Deck 2 at least a little bit, saying how they want to release it and some features that they plan to have on it. We also have Nvidia trying to make hybrid laptops and multiple GPU devices much better on Linux, not just for them, but for all Linux users, not just Nvidia users. And we also have Google finally killing older adblock and tracker blockers on Chrome, meaning if you use Chrome, your ad experience on the web is gonna be even worse than it was previously. And we also have this message from our sponsor. This video is sponsored by TuxCare. They offer solutions that make it easier to keep your Linux fleet secure and updated, notably with non-disruptive kernel live patching, and also extended lifecycle support for enterprise Linux distros that go end of life, like Ubuntu, CentOS, and Oracle Linux, as well as extended support for languages and software development frameworks like Java, PHP, Python, or Spring. And they now offer an endless version of that support, meaning it's no longer just a stopgap measure that lets you plan your transition with a little bit of extra time. It is support for as long as you need it without another deadline to keep in mind, meaning you can keep getting security patches, fixes for critical vulnerabilities, and more for as many years as you need for your Linux kernel for a lot of important packages like Apache, PHP, MySQL, or OpenSSL, or for the versions of the languages and frameworks that you rely upon. All of this happens with one single script that connects to your TuxCare's end-of-life patch repos without requiring a system reboot to get started. You can also get these same patches without reboots for currently supported Linux distros, meaning you get all the patches to your kernel, critical shared libraries, or hypervisors automatically without needing to reboot your systems. So you don't create any downtime or disruptions, or you don't have to plan any maintenance windows, and it all happens in the background automatically while your systems are running. If you want to learn more about TuxCare's endless lifecycle support, obviously all you have to do is click the link in the description. Okay, so the writing was on the wall. Google had been clear about how things were going to go with older, full-featured extensions for Google Chrome, but it finally is here. Google has ended support for these older extensions in Chrome that used the Manifest v2 standard. They only now support Manifest v3 extensions. And this means a lot of really useful extensions simply do not work on Chrome anymore. Notably ad blockers and tracker blockers. They mostly have light versions that do not block nearly as much stuff, and among the casualties is Ublock Origin, probably the biggest and most powerful ad and tracker blocker out there, and while it does have a light version that works on the latest version of Chrome, it simply doesn't work as well, or I would argue it doesn't work at all. If you consider that an ad blocker that doesn't block all ads is pretty much non-functional. Chrome will even automatically disable these extensions, so it's not like if you had it installed previously, it's gonna keep working. The extension is just dead and disabled, no matter if you used it previously or not. The developer behind Ublock Origin recommends people move to Firefox to keep the entire scope of the extension working. They actually have a page on their GitHub repo stating Ublock Origin works best on Firefox. Now, fortunately, other browsers have mostly all kept support for Manifest v2, including Firefox or Edge or Opera, and virtually every Chromium-based browser. Google downplayed that issue, saying that 93% of actively maintained extensions in the Chrome Web Store are already compliant with Manifest v3, but it could mean that all apps that could never comply with Manifest v3 because the APIs they need are no longer there, maybe these apps are considered unmaintained because they will never get any other version, so maybe they are not counted in these 93%. Second, the 7% of extensions that aren't compatible or aren't ported yet might be the extensions that people actually use, meaning ad blockers and tracker blockers. Also, probably Google counts the Lite versions as the real thing, as in Ublock Origin Lite counts for Ublock Origin, even though it has way less features. Now, if it wasn't clear enough, if you're still using Google Chrome, you need to ditch that piece of junk right now. Literally every other browser on Linux or any other system will now be faster because they will have less ads and less tracking scripts to load. And also, you're gonna get more features with better extensions, you're gonna get less data collection, less privacy invasion. Google Chrome is very likely the worst browser option that you can get right now on any system, so it's probably time to ditch it. And if you're thinking, not a lot of people use ad blockers, it's not gonna matter, I think it's about 30% of the entire worldwide people using the internet that use an ad blocker or declared using one. If Google loses 30% market share on Chrome, they're gonna feel it. Now, Valve has confirmed this week that yes, there will be a Steam Deck 2, but that no, it is not coming anytime soon. They talked to reviews.org Australia and told them that they never intended to do a yearly release of a Steam Deck with marginally better internals each time. They don't see any reason to do that, by which I assume they mean no financial reason to do that, because that would be a lot of work to plan a device each year for little sales. Not everyone would upgrade to a model that has marginally better hardware. They also confirmed that they are waiting for a generational leap to provide a much better device, with better performance without sacrificing battery life. They are working on it, but they won't have yearly refreshers, which I think is a sound approach. They also talked about their competitors' handhelds. They said they're happy to see the space expand with plenty of different offerings, which is generally what all companies say when there's a lot of competition on the market. We're really happy to see some competition here. They also said that the handheld the handheld form factor isn't a solved problem yet. And so there are plenty of things to fix still. And so presumably they're happy to see competitors trying stuff out so that Valve can then pick the best ideas that people liked and implement some of those ideas in their next product. It's basically free market research that Valve doesn't have to do themselves. Valve also said that variable refresh rate is a feature that they want to target in their to-do list. It's at the top of their list right now for Steam Deck 2, as is the battery life. Valve thinks the Steam Deck has best-in-class battery life for now, which might be true, but it's still pretty bad. And they now say that they would like to improve upon it, which is good news. Now, in the end, I personally hope that they don't wait too long before they release the Steam Deck 2. I don't think the current Steam Deck model has 2 or 3 more years of AAA title support in it. It can barely play AAA titles that release now, and while it is not necessarily its entire goal, if we do not have a AAA capable platform for developers to target, they will just not bother with supporting Linux with anti-cheat or anything else. So we do need that. I think the Steam Deck 1 and the Steam Deck OLED are okay, but they don't have 2 or 3 more years in them. We need the Steam Deck 2 soon. After that, we don't need a yearly release cycle, but we do need the Steam Deck 2 pretty soon. Now, Nvidia is apparently looking at how they can help Linux in general, not just Nvidia drivers, support dynamic display muxing hardware for multiplexing hardware inside of modern laptops. If this is a bunch of gibberish, it concerns hybrid devices with integrated GPUs and dedicated GPUs. Basically, it's trying to have a good solution to let the right GPU render the contents of the current app, depending on whether you need a lot of performance or not, and then no matter which GPU has rendered the content, no matter which GPU any display is plugged into, being able to just display the application on any display at any moment. This seems like normal stuff, but it's currently not really working on Linux. Nvidia engineers are looking at ways they could better support which GPU displays which screen's contents, and they want to implement a better solution than the current one we have on Linux, notably by implementing this solution in the direct rendering manager or in the kernel management system, but not at the driver level. They're apparently backed by AMD for the avenue that they want to implement this in. AMD just didn't say, hey, we agree with Nvidia. They just suggested the exact same avenue independently for fixing the exact same problem. So the goal is to let the compositor manage this kind of stuff, and as such, Nvidia wants to give compositors a nice, solid, standardized way of doing it compared to what exists now, which is pretty bad and can result in serious performance loss when you're rendering something with a dedicated GPU, but you're outputting that on an external display that is linked to the internal GPU. Nvidia proposed an architecture to fix the issue, where Linux would offer an API on top of the kernel to handle which GPU outputs to which display in real time, and the compositor itself, on Wayland obviously, would then use that API to make sure each app is rendered by the right GPU and displayed on the right display, no matter what is connected to what. Now, I truly hope this actually happens, not just for Nvidia users, but for everyone else. Hybrid devices work on Linux if you only use them as laptops, but as soon as you start having to plug in external monitors and you have to render certain apps on certain GPUs, then it becomes a thinking game. Which port do I use to plug in what? Because if you use the wrong one, you get terrible performance. That's not great. You shouldn't have to worry about this, so I hope Nvidia can manage this. Now, it looks like x86 CPU providers are banding together, likely to face off against the rise of ARM as a competing architecture. Intel and AMD have now created an x86 ecosystem advisory group, in which they also invited other industry leaders, like, for example, Linus Torvalds. And as AMD said in their press release, the goal is to unite the industry to define the future of the x86 architecture, but also to focus on a more unified set of instructions and interfaces. They apparently want to improve compatibility and consistency between x86 products. They want to write clear guidelines on the architecture itself to make sure that software works reliably on any x86 CPU without requiring specific adjustments. Other members of the board include Broadcom, Dell, Google, HP, Lenovo, Microsoft, or Red Hat, and also Tim Sweeney from Epic Games. Now, in AMD's press release, their CEO spelled it a bit more clearly, saying that this advisory board will ensure x86 continues evolving as the compute platform of choice for developers and customers, meaning they want x86 to stay the default that any computer maker goes to, instead of the default becoming ARM or anything else. In the end, I am pretty surprised that AMD and Intel didn't form this kind of board way earlier than this. They've always been big competitors, but also they're the only two main ones driving the x86 architecture. It's probably just because there was never such a big threat to the architecture as ARM is right now, so they never really needed to focus on improved collaboration on the architecture. Now they're gonna do it. I think it's cool. They already collaborated on USB, PCIe and stuff like that, but having them more standardizing the entire x86 architecture is probably for the best. Now, we have good news for AMD users on Linux, because the graphics drivers for AMD GPUs will apparently move to a more aggressive power setting by default in the kernel 6.13, provided you use the AMD GPU kernel driver and not the Pro drivers from AMD, which should be most people or distributions default to AMD GPU, not AMD GPU Pro, which, as far as I remember, is not open source anyway. This means that the driver will default to the profile called Full Screen 3D, at least for dedicated GPUs. Integrated GPUs will keep the exact same boot up profile that they currently use. This means an increase in power consumption when the dedicated GPU is in use, but it will also bring more aggressive clock speed ramping and memory frequencies ramping, meaning you will go much faster from low clock speed and low memory frequencies to high values instead of having to wait for a little bit, meaning gameplay or just 3D applications should run way more smoothly by default. This compromise is apparently necessary. You do have to have that increased power consumption at all times to have this profile active, because Linux doesn't really have a way to tell the kernel driver that a 3D app is currently running on screen and to switch to a specific GPU profile on the fly to match what the GPU is doing. You do have to set that profile and then it doesn't really move. so they kinda have to default to the better performing profile to avoid leaving some performance on the table. This patch will be merged for the kernel 6.13 unless something goes wrong. Now this performance profile fix is one I had to do manually myself when I set up my entire Linux gaming console. My Radeon 6650 XT was incapable of rendering games at 1080p medium details at 60 FPS, which is not normal. After I found out about this fix online and implemented it, all games were rendered at 1440p upscaled to 4K at ultra details or at least high details at 60 FPS, and that was what I thought this GPU was capable of. So good news for all dedicated GPU AMD users here. Now you might remember the terrible open sourcing of Winamp, where the owners of that old Windows music player decided to apply a weird source available license to it that would even potentially contradict GitHub's terms of service. No one was impressed by what was released, and Winamp was slammed pretty much everywhere by everyone for doing this open sourcing, and I'm putting this term in air quotes, in the worst way possible. When it looks like things are really not going well at all, the entire GitHub repo for Winamp was deleted this week. All the code was removed, potentially with some code that wasn't the original code of Winamp. If anyone contributed to the project since the GitHub repo was open, then all of their code has been removed just as well. It was also found that there was some GPL v2 code in their codebase, meaning the entire license that they applied was pretty much null and void, because GPL v2 kinda means you have to make every part of your project that touches or modify that GPL v2 code, well, you have to make that GPL as well, and you cannot license your entire project under something different. Apparently, Winamp developers were contacted about that. That might be a reason why they deleted things. But also, the owners of Winamp apparently had some other things that were not supposed to be in that repo, like the server code of Shoutcast, a distributed network audio server, plus some Intel and Microsoft source code as well. Now, all of these issues combined is probably why they decided to pull the entire repo out of GitHub. It makes sense, and honestly, it is a masterclass in how not to open your source code. You pick a non-open source license, a source available one, you grab the copyrights of every contribution made to your project, so no one wants to contribute ever, and then you forget to clean up that code properly, and you have a license that even technically should not allow you to be on GitHub. It's just the worst way possible, and it's really a fun disaster to see unfold. Just like it's always fun to see me unfold these segues to our sponsor, Tuxedo Computers. They make laptops and desktops and generally just computers that ship with Linux pre-installed. The reason you would want to buy this instead of buying a computer with Windows is that you know that all the hardware is really well supported under Linux, which is absolutely crucial for laptops, where sometimes you just have a Windows laptop, you try to install Linux on it, and you're gonna face compatibility problems for the end of your days. With Tuxedo, you don't have this issue, and they have a big range of computers that will serve every price point, every need. Plenty of options for the hardware inside, for the looks of the device, for the logo you want engraved on your laptop, for keyboard layouts, and a bunch of things. Tuxedo Computers is all I use these days. I do all of these videos on one of their laptops, the InfinityBook Pro 16. I do all my gaming on one of their desktops, the Tuxedo Cube. And yeah, if you need a new computer, you want to run Linux on it, you want to support a company that actively contributes to Linux, then click the link in the description below and check out their devices. In the meantime, thank you all for watching the video. You know everything you need to do for the video to be more popular, all the buttons. Click them as usual, leave a comment for the algorithm, whatever else. It's always nice to see. And if you want to support the channel financially, there are also plenty of links in the description that will give you plenty of pretty cool perks. So check that out if you want to. It starts at $1 a month and it's really good value. So thanks for watching, and I guess you will see me in the next one next week. Bye!